Parenting, I think, is one of those things that can bring us the most joy and cause us the most heartache, occasionally at the same time. It may be one of the greatest responsibilities that we'll ever have. It'll probably be one of the most profound things we ever do. Yet it's probably one of the things in life that we are least prepared for and for which we have had the least amount of training. And on top of that, the demands and expectations on parenting skills evolves over time. It's kind of a moving target. Children's development often causes changes in their personality, their maturity, their attitudes, and the world in which we are trying to raise our children seems to be constantly changing. So where can we find answers? To what can we cling in these ever-changing, often uncertain times? As I'm sure most of us have discovered by now, there are usually no easy answers, no quick magic fixes that work 100% of the time. Therefore, we must learn and develop a variety of strategies and skills which we can use when we need them or when the needs arise. Many parents tell us at the beginning of our Incredible Years program that they are frustrated, often due to the fact that their responses to their children's behavior has not worked, and in fact, in some cases, it's made the behavior worse. They tell us sometimes they get to the point where they don't know what else to do. Well, this is our goal for the next 90 minutes, to briefly explore and discuss a variety of parenting strategies that can be used over multiple situations and can ultimately improve our children's behavior, help them grow and develop in healthy ways, reduce our stress and frustration, and raise our pride and confidence in our children. One of the first questions I always like to ask parents is, how many perfect parents do we have in the group today? And no hands will go up. Then I'll ask, how many of us are ever gonna be perfect parents? Again, no hands go up. So the question becomes, then what matters? If we accept the fact that we're never gonna be perfect, what matters? And two things always come up. People will mention, well, what matters then is that we do our best and that we grow from our mistakes. That's all that can be expected of us. No more, no less. If we accept that we're never going to be perfect parents, then we are accepting the fact that we're going to make mistakes. It's to be expected that we're going to make mistakes. It's important then to consider and reflect upon how we grow from our mistakes. Our personal challenge for each one of us is, how do we continue to aspire to perfection while growing from our mistakes and becoming the best parents we can be? Then the question becomes, how many of us have perfect children? Now, I know sometimes they're pretty close. I'll attest to that sometimes they get pretty close, but not quite perfect. How many of our children are ever going to be perfect? Again, probably none. So what matters then? The same thing as applies to us, that they do their best and they grow from their mistakes. Same as us. If we accept the fact that our children, like us, will make mistakes, that it will be expected that they make mistakes, then the challenge in raising them becomes, how do we motivate them to aspire to a perfection while helping them grow from their mistakes and grow to be the best they can be? So let's begin our discussion. I'm going to start my share screen, some of which I'll be sharing with you is just knowledge I've picked up over the years from my parents, from other parents that I've known, from the parents that we have in our Incredible Years groups. And I'll do my best over the course of this discussion to give credit where credit is due. So here's kind of our agenda for today, the topics that we're going to cover in this next hour and 20 minutes. These are the topics: relationship, child's play, promoting self-esteem, cooperation, competence, creativity, and problem solving. All of those things are probably easier to teach our kids than we realize sometimes. Bringing out the best in our child, motivating our children to do the right thing, effective rules and boundaries and limits, discipline, and natural and logical consequences. The real juicy things kind of come towards the end, you'll see there. But there's a lot to talk about before that, before we get to that. And hopefully you'll see why when we get there. So after each one of these, we'll pause, and Julie will kind of call the questions and help us along that way. I did want to mention that we had a few questions that came in during the registration process. I wanted folks to know that we did see those. And just real briefly, one of them was how do we deal with the feeling that we aren't doing enough for our children during this stay at home and this challenging time that we're in, working from home and school from home and all that. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Hopefully, we've touched on that already, talking about we know we're not going to be perfect, but we just do the best we can every day. Another one is, what do you do when you don't truly like your child? You know, personalities are different, and we don't like everybody. But what if that someone is your child? And we'll talk about that. I'll touch on that a little bit in just a second. Then there was a question about potty training. We'll talk about that. And that's a good example, because we aren't going to specifically spend a lot of time talking about potty training. We aren't going to spend a lot of time specifically talking about a lot of things. But in the generalities that we cover, hopefully they will apply to different things like potty training and so on and so forth. And then the last one that we had was tips for providing telehealth parenting to parents. How can we coach and help parents virtually? That may come up in the end, towards the end. But I just want to make sure that if we don't answer your questions to your satisfaction, please bring them up again. All right, so first topic is relationship. And I think in the process of raising our children, we often overlook this one. And I think we're doing a disservice if we do overlook it. So we're going to spend a few minutes just talking about relationship. And if you think of a relationship that you have with a spouse or a partner or a significant other in your life, what are some key ingredients that need to be there? And usually when we ask this question, these things and others will come up. But communication is almost always the first one. And we like to emphasize that communication has two parts. Communication is expressing yourself well and effectively, but it's also listening effectively. And what I heard one time, I'm sure you probably all heard this, but we're encouraged to listen to understand, not listen to respond. And I think all of us from time to time may fall into this trap where someone is talking to us and we're thinking what we're going to say next. We're thinking how we're going to respond to that instead of really listening to understand. So that's important. Trust is important. Respect and honesty, consideration of the other person's feeling, very important. Appreciation is important. And fun, having fun in a relationship. If you're dating somebody or going with somebody and you never do anything fun, it's not going to be much of a relationship. So that's part of it too. And then one time a mom in a group said humility. And I asked her what she meant by that. And she said, well, being able to admit you were wrong and being able to forgive. Patience is another one. Acceptance and support. A grandma said that in a group one time, and I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, you have to accept people for who they are. If you get into a relationship and you try to change that other person, or you try to make that other person who you want them to be, that's more often than not going to be a doomed relationship. I think we've all seen that, either personally or in others, that you can't try to change people. In a lot of ways, you have to accept them for who they are. But then she said support. And I asked her what she meant by that. And this was great. She said that we try to help the other person become the best version of themselves that they can be. And I said, well, that's a good way to look at it. To help the other person be the best person that they can be. And compromise. In every relationship, there has to be compromise. One person does not get their way all the time. There has to be some compromise. Now, then we talk about if we want a strong and healthy relationship with our children, one that's going to stand the test of time and make it through the storms that are going to come, then don't these things need to be in that relationship as well? And if we agree that they do, I think it may look a little bit differently with a spouse or another adult, compromise, so on and so forth. But if they all need to be there for our relationship with our children to be strong and healthy, we have to be looking for ways that can happen. All right, let me pause there and see if there are any questions, comments.
We haven't gotten any typed in yet. If anybody has one, go ahead and type it in now.
Okay.
That nobody has yet.
All right, well, we'll move on. And questions and comments will always be welcome. So the next topic I call child's play. And we're going to talk about what children can learn through play, what we can teach them through play. And I like this title because in a way, it kind of reminds me, when we say child's play, we're talking about something that's pretty easy, right? And it just kind of serves to remind me that parenting doesn't always have to be as difficult as it seems sometimes, that sometimes it's easier than we think. And hopefully we'll see some examples of that as we're talking. So one of the things that you may hear is child-directed play. And many of you may have experienced that or know what that's about or know some of the benefits of that. But being child-directed is going to have benefits and implications across their lives, not just play. But when they're small, when they're younger, being child-directed during play can be a great opportunity to teach them not only about creativity and self-confidence, things like that, but about power and control. If you think about what the ratio of power and control between parents and children generally are, we would say that parents probably have at least 95% of the control in that relationship, right? We decide when they wake up or when they eat or when they get dressed or where they go during the day or what they wear or what they do when they get home, when they turn the TV off, when they go to bed. we decide all of those things, and we have to. We have to be in control of a lot of the things until they learn how to do them themselves. But if we overlook the fact that there's an opportunity to let them have some power and control, then I think we're missing a great learning opportunity. If we think about what can happen if a person feels like they have no control over anything, even a child, but especially as they get older, what can happen? Well, they may start fighting for control. They may think, well, the only way I can get some control over anything is to fight for it. And we know what that looks like. Rebellion. We'll see that in the preteens and the older children, how they'll rebel. They'll just refuse, to do anything. It may also end up in low self-confidence, poor decision-making, discouragement, frustration. And these are all things we'd like to avoid with our children. All we have to do is think of the last couple of months, I think, in our lives, and the amount of power and control that we have lost over our lives in the last couple of months with the pandemic, and what that's felt like for us. Some of us are handling it fairly well. Others are having more difficulty. But we've all, I think, had to deal with some level of frustration, inconvenience, anger, discouragement that these times have brought us. Now think about this. This may be the way kids feel all the time. And they haven't had a lot of the opportunities that we've had to develop coping skills. So their ability to deal with limited power and control aren't necessarily very well adjusted. So what can we do? There are many areas in which we cannot be too child-directed. I mentioned a few already. We can't be so child-directed with food because they'll want to have ice cream for breakfast, or they'll never want to go to bed, so on and so forth. So we can't be child-directed with everything. Some things we have to be in control of. But there are many areas in which we can be child-directed. Two of them that we're going to talk about are play and communication. Now, play, if you think about sitting down to play Uno or Candyland with a small child, and you're trying to teach them the game the way it's supposed to go, your way, basically. They see it as, well, this is mom's way. Why does it have to be this way? And eventually you'll play games with kids and they'll say, well, you know what? We're going to do this differently. When you land on this space, it means this now, Or you'll be playing Uno with them, and after a few minutes, you might be thinking, this is not the way I remember Uno going. I don't, this is different. But they, typically children don't understand the permanency of rules until they get to be about 6 years old. We used to call it in the old days, the age of reason. But in child development, they don't fully grasp the permanency of rules, that Candyland should be the exact same way every time, that hopscotch should be the exact same way every time. They don't get that until they're about 6. That extends to our rules as well. We may hear them say, well, yeah, bedtime was 8 o'clock yesterday, but that was yesterday. Today's a different day. Why can't bedtime be 9 o'clock or 10 or whatever? And we'll talk more about rules a little bit later on. But that just illustrates, I think, some of the struggle we may have with the kids when we start talking about rules and control and power. So if they, and you may have done this before, but when they want to change the rules of something, Or we're playing with Legos and they want to build it a certain way, and we think we have a better idea of how to build what they're trying to build. But instead of imposing our direction and our control, allow them to be in charge of building the Legos. Because after all, it's Legos, it's not that critical. It's Candyland, it's not that critical. They can be in charge of some things, and they need to be in charge of some things. If not, then we're at risk for some of the things I've already mentioned. So we have to look for ways, and play is one. If you haven't seen the Lego movie, I would recommend that, because that illustrates a lot of these things we're talking about. I don't want to spoil it for anybody if you haven't seen it, but just think about child-directed play and watch the Lego movie. The second thing that I mentioned where we can be child-directed is communication. And this is especially true as they get older. A lot of times when parents have a conversation with a child, it's often a one-way conversation, or at least the conversation is controlled by one person. And that person is generally us. We're asking the questions that we want answered. We're talking about what we think is important, and we're directing the conversation. And oftentimes when we do that, what is the response that we often see with the kids? They may shut down, or they may say, I don't know, or nothing, or some of those questions. But if we allow the conversation to be child-directed and start it off with something like, what do you want to tell me? And start the conversation that way. What do you think is important about this situation? And start the conversation that way. I have a great story, and if I can condense it into just a couple minutes, I'd just love to share it with you. I was visiting a family one time, and the mom, the little boy in the family, he was about first grade, but he was a little behind in reading and some of the other skills that first graders should have. He was a little bit behind, and mom wanted to kind of illustrate, or to kind of demonstrate where he was and what she was dealing with. So she asked him, James, go get a book, come read it to Mr. Kevin. So he goes to get a book, and he comes back with Noah's Ark. That's the book. And he starts reading. And he's obviously struggling, you can tell. And you could tell that mom was getting a little bit frustrated as he was struggling. But he got through the story. He read the story about how God asked Noah to build an ark. And he wanted him to do it this size, and this long, and this high, and this wide, and out of this kind of wood. And Noah kept saying, God, I don't know why you're asking me to do this. I'm not a boat builder. I don't know what I'm doing. And God said, just don't worry. Just do as I ask you, and you'll be fine. Everything will be fine. And so then God said to collect up all the animals, two of each animal, and put them on the ark. And again, Noah said, what? I don't know if I can do this. And God said, don't worry, just do what I ask you to do, and you'll be safe. So then it rained 40 days and 40 nights. The earth flooded, but Noah and his family made it through, and they survived, and everything, worked out fine for them. So he finishes this, and mom says, okay, now watch. And she says, James, what did God ask Noah to build? And he said, a big boat. And she said, no, it was an ark. He asked him to build an ark. She's worried about his comprehension. She asked him how big the ark was supposed to be, what kind of wood it was supposed to be. He didn't know. She asked him how many animals. He knew that. But then she asked him how many days and nights did it rain, and what kind of bird did he send out. to see if there was dry land? He didn't know. What did they see at the end? And he couldn't think of a rainbow, so he didn't know that. And you could just see the discouragement in his little face. Well, mom finally gets to the point where she's exasperated, and she said, James, what did you get out of that story? And you know what he said? He said, if you listen to God, you'll be safe. That's what he got out of the story. And that's not what mom asked him about. That's not what mom thought was important about the story. You know, she was asking him all the other things. But this little guy got it. He got the message. And I think if mom would have started out with a question like, James, what did you get out of that story? And started with that, I think that situation would have been a lot better for both mom and for James. So when we're talking to our kids, and we can be directed, child-directed with our conversation, child-directed with our play, you'll see some benefits. You'll see trust, self-esteem. They'll get to experience enjoying spending time with them. And that can go a little bit to the one parent's question about enjoying their child. This is a way that you can do that maybe. And also we model, and modeling, we'll talk about that a little more, but we model trust and respect and listening and compromise and cooperation. We model these things so that our child can see them. All right, let's pause there and see if there's any comments or questions.
I haven't gotten any questions that came in yet. So,
Okay.
yep,
All
if
right.
you guys type them into the general everyone, or to me, Julie Blanco, if you have any, we'll get to them, but thank you. But that was a great story, Kevin. I love that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. Okay. So the next topic, bringing out the best in our children. Oftentimes, as parents, we fill the role also of a coach. And if you think about the role of a coach, by far, most of a coach's work is done at practice. For every 2-hour game, there are hours and hours and hours of practice that happen beforehand. A good coach will have his or her team prepared to do their best once the game begins. Because once the game begins, there's not a lot a coach can do. Coaches have to sit on the side. They may be able to interject a word of encouragement or a reminder or some sort of instruction. But the players have to make the baskets. They have to hit the ball or catch the ball. They have to be prepared to do what they need to do out there. And so when our kids enter the game of life, when they leave to go to school and they're out there and we're not around anymore, they have to know and be prepared to do what needs to be done. And that's where we come in as coaches. We're not going to be talking about how to teach our kids to shoot free throws or hit a baseball or dribble a soccer ball. We'll be talking about other skills like sharing, listening, following instructions, being persistent, cooperating, being patient, expressing their emotions in a healthy way, those sorts of things. And probably the best way to get better at something is to practice, practice, practice. If we want to learn how to play the piano or another musical instrument, we have to practice. If we want to learn how to cook, we have to practice. It doesn't usually just happen magically overnight. And so how do we coach? How do we practice with our kids when we're talking about sharing or cooperating or listening? Anything that we see them do. When a coach sees his team in a game and they lose the game by 2 points, the basketball game, And he looks back and says, you know what? We missed 10 free throws in that game. If we would have made 5 of our free throws, we would have probably won. So what are we going to practice tomorrow at practice? Free throws. And we're just going to practice them and practice them and practice them. And, you know, that other quotation there, I don't remember where I heard that, but I'm sure probably more than one person has said it. Don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong. And that applies to free throws. You know, many basketball players will shoot free throws until they can do it with their eyes closed and make most of them. That's practicing until you can't get it wrong. Now, when we're talking about sharing or listening, over the years, parents have told me many things that they came up with to practice some of the skills that they want to help their kids get better at. One of them is sharing. And this mom told the story of how she had sharing practice. She had the kids come down after supper and said, bring one thing, one of your favorite things from your room. And they sat around the living room and they all shared why this is my favorite thing, what this means to me, where I got it, why it's important to me, why I like it so much. And they just shared that, their thoughts and their feelings. Then after that, a couple nights, she said, all right, we're going to do something a little different tonight. I want you to take whatever you brought down for this show and tell sort of thing, but now we're going to give it to someone else for the night. So you're going to give one of your favorite things to somebody else to play with for one night. And they're going to exchange their thing with someone, and so on and so forth, till everybody walks. So everybody has shared something and everybody's gotten something. And just that feeling that the kids had about, well, this is pretty cool. You know, so-and-so let me have for tonight one of their favorite things. And I've always wanted to play with this. But everybody knew that they had better take care of that thing because somebody else had one of their favorite things. And so there was a mutual a respect and honor that was going around that started to develop. You know, and at one point she said she had to kind of smile on the inside because the older kids thought they were catching on. And the older kids started bringing stuff down they hadn't seen or played with for years. And they're like, I'm just going to bring this down because I don't care about it. But the littler kids kept bringing their favorite, most special things. And it almost shamed, I guess, or there's probably a better word, but shamed the older ones into like, oh, you know, here I am bringing some worthless thing and the little ones are still bringing their best things. So they turned that around and they started. And over a short amount of time, the kids were practicing sharing and they were getting good at it. And they were starting to realize why sharing is such a nice thing. Whereas before, as a typical 2 and 3 and 4-year-old, sharing is probably one of the worst ideas we've come up with in the world, right? They don't understand it. But by practicing it, and this was such an ingenious way that this mom came up with that worked for her. And there's lots of other ways to practice sharing, to get better at sharing. Listening is another one. Many parents say, my kids don't listen. Well, a good way to practice listening that a mom shared with us is she said, I thought about Simon Says. And I thought about the game Simon Says. And how that's all about listening. You have to listen to whoever Simon is. And if Simon says, do this, you have to do it. If he says, do that, you have to do it. But if you're told to do something and Simon doesn't say it and you don't listen and you do it, well, you're out. That's a game that kids love, Simon Says, but it's a good way to practice listening, to get better at listening. Another one was where a parent said they like to play this with their children, where someone will start a story and they'll give the first 2 sentences. And then the next person has to pick it up from there. and add 2 sentences to the story. And it builds imagination and creativity, and it's fun, but you have to listen. You have to listen to what's happened so far for your 2 sentences to make any sense, right? And kids listening to the story, and they're listening to each other. They're practicing listening, and they're getting better at listening. So there's lots of ways for us to be coaches and to practice that sort of thing. We'll pause again, see if there are any questions.
I don't see any questions yet. No.
Okay. All
yeah.
right. Well, I hope everyone's getting something out of these slides. The next thing is motivating children to do the right thing. And we're going to talk about those 3 things that are up there: positive reinforcement, praise, and incentives. You know, some parents say from time to time, why should we even talk about this? They're just doing what they're supposed to do. I ask them to do something, they do it, that's the way it should be. Or they have their chores, or they have their responsibilities, they should just do them. Then the question becomes, at least in my mind, what generally happens to things that are taken for granted? If we take something for granted, more often than not, one possible result is that it quits, it stops, it goes away. If we take it for granted, we don't know what we've got till it's gone. You've heard things like that. So that's one reason right there not to take our children's good behavior for granted, if no other reason. Some may say, well, they know that if they don't do what I tell them to do, they'll be sorry. And that could mean a lot of things, but they'll be sorry. That to me sounds like an element of fear. And when we talk at the beginning about key components of a healthy, strong relationship, fear hardly ever comes up. So I don't know that that we should use fear in a certain amount of fear or type of fear in our relationship with our children. If there's something else that would work just as well, we should probably do that. And then finally, some may say, I don't believe in using rewards or praise. For one, I can't afford it. And for another thing, the kids will get dependent on it, and they'll just do it for the reward. Well, all right, so let's talk about those pretty briefly here. Think about praise and appreciation. Appreciation almost gets mentioned every time when we talk about relationship at the beginning of a group. Think about what it means to us. We do what we're supposed to do when we show up at work. Why should our supervisor pull us aside and thank us for doing a job well done, and for being the person we are, and for bringing what we bring to the agency? Nobody else can do that. You know, we have unique gifts, and the agency is a better agency because of us. Our supervisor doesn't have to say things like that. We're just doing our job. We're just doing what we're supposed to do. But when a supervisor says things like that, think about what it does for us. Or when our kids come up and say, you are a great mom. You're a great dad. Think about what that does to us. We're just doing what we're supposed to do. But to have that recognition, that praise, that appreciation does something for us. It does something for kids too. And incentive programs, you know, talking about that. People, I'm not too sure about that. That's one area where potty training can come in, and it's a place where I like to refer to potty training, because many of us don't remember when we were potty trained. Most of us probably don't. But we know of kids that have been potty trained, and we know for many of them, little stickers for when they use the potty. They love stickers. I don't think it's a coincidence that the phase, the age where we're potty training them and the age where they love stickers more than gold are the same. I don't think that's a coincidence. So when they do use the potty and we give them a sticker, that's motivation to them. You know, that may help them think, uh-oh, I have that feeling in my body that I need to use the potty. Let me get there because I can get a sticker. That may be their motivation. But you know what? Eventually, you and I don't need stickers to go to the potty anymore, right? Why? Because we've figured it out. We've realized, we've come to learn that using the bathroom is its own reward, right? We don't have anybody needing to change our diapers or anything like that because we've figured it out and we know that using the bathroom is its own reward. When kids get to that step, they don't need stickers anymore. They've figured it out. So incentives are meant to be temporary, and they may be the only reason our children do their chores, or maybe the main reason, but they may be the only reason kids do their chores or finish their homework, because they know there's a star, and if they collect 20 stars, there's a prize that awaits them, something that they love. And that may be the reason they do it, just for the stars or the prize. But what's happening? They're getting into a habit, and they're starting to realize that whatever it is its own reward. Even to the extent we can get our children to learn and to know that obeying us and doing what we ask them to do is its own reward. Think of it. If they do what they're supposed to do, no one's fussing at them. They have more free time. They have more freedom. They have other advantages and benefits that they didn't have before. Everybody's happier around the house. You know the old expression, when mom is happy, everybody's happy. Or if mom is not happy, nobody's happy. You know that expression, that old expression. So they start to learn that, okay, if I do what I'm supposed to do, people around me are happy and in better moods, and they everyone's doing their part, and things go a lot smoother, and I'm happy. So they learn, listening to mom makes me happy. If we could teach our kids that lesson, listening to us will make you happy, right? So that's something we can try to do. And the rewards, parents have come up with all kinds of ideas for this, but the rewards don't have to be money. They don't have to be food. They don't have to be sweets. They don't have to be things that maybe aren't the best for rewards. They can be simple. A number of parents told me they make coupons out of construction paper, and the coupon might say, one day you don't have to wash dishes when it's your turn. Or one day dad will clean your room for you, right? Kids love those kinds of things. And if you make a bunch of those, and some big, some small, maybe they get to choose dinner one Saturday. What are we going to have for dinner? It's your choice. And they pull that coupon out of there. Those kinds of things. Kids will love that. Just think what a kid wouldn't do for a coupon that says, one day, dad will clean your room. And pull that coupon out and say, Dad, today's the day I'd like to redeem this coupon. And dad says, all right. And dad does it. Think of it. Think of it. So they don't have to cost a lot of money, or kids don't have to be dependent on them. Once they figure out that doing whatever it is its own reward, you'll find that they won't need those little rewards quite as often. Let's see, where are we at on time? One last thing. When we set up reward programs, we have to be careful because there's a couple of caveats to that. One, we don't want to reward the stopping of bad behavior. So if we say, if our kids are throwing a fit, or they're just acting very rambunctiously, and we say, all right, I'll give you a reward if you stop all that. Because what's that training them? That's training them, in order to stop that bad behavior, they have to start it. So we're kind of training them to act bad so that they can stop, and we can reward them for stopping. That's a pitfall that we can sometimes fall into. Another one kind of related to that is some parents think, all right, well, I'll tell the kids, if you stay on green all day at school, you'll get a star. And then if you get, when you save up 5 stars, you'll get a reward. Well, what if they go to school and somebody says something, and maybe they're in a bad mood to begin with, and they have a misstep right off the bat at 8:30 in the morning, and they, oops, you're on yellow, Well, then they've blown it for the day, right? They can't stay on green all day because first thing in the morning, they're on yellow. So what's their motivation to do good the rest of the day? They don't have one because they've already blown their chance. So we want to be careful, or we don't want to say, if you stay on green every day this week, at the end of the week, there'll be a reward or something. Because what if Monday they slip up? Then what's their motivation Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to do good, because they can't reach their goal? So when you set up things, if you do, you want to make sure that it's positively focused and that kids always have the chance to make good. Because they're going to make mistakes. We already talked about that. But, it's a complicated thing. And this is a great discussion that we have in the Incredible Years program. It's one of the many things that are very well presented, and we have a good discussion of. All right, let's pause there. Any questions or comments on that?
So I haven't gotten any questions. I have gotten a couple comments, Kevin, that say, that they are finding the information really helpful, and that the lack of questions is not because people are not finding it helpful or engaged, but that thank you, and they're getting good information. I have a question, and this is or a thought, like one of the things, my youngest child is a freshman in high school now, or just finished her freshman year. So my kids are older, but one of the things that usually I would do, and I just don't know if maybe just for discussion now, is, once in a while my kids went to schools where they got marks. It used to be demerit cards, but then they turned it around to getting, like you got a mark on your card if you got in trouble at school. And that usually if my kids came home and told me they got a mark, we would talk about what happened, but they would come home kind of worried they were going to get in trouble at home. And I would usually take that the mark, they already got their consequence, and the consequence was their mark at school. And so they would not get like re-punished at home.
Double jeopardy, yeah.
Right, because that's, now if there was something that was, luckily they never came home with, like I stabbed a kid with a pen or something like really
right.
terrible. But, it's like, well, okay, let's talk about that. What happened? How do you feel about it? How do you, but that not to repunish them because the mark was their consequence. That was, here's a behavior. If you engage in this behavior, you get a consequence. Right. It happened. They got their consequence. We talked about it and dropped it,
Right. I think that's great. It reminds me of a story of when I was teaching, which I did for a couple of years before I got into mental health. But it also illustrates what we were talking about earlier. When they come home and you find out they got marks at school, or they got punished, or some kind of consequence at school, what if the conversation began with, instead of us saying, well, now on top of that, you're going to have to do this around here, or you just lost that privilege, or I told you about doing that. Or what if instead of the conversation starting off like that, the conversation started off, what have you learned? What did you learn about yourself or about life? Or, what have you learned from this? That whole thing about growing from our mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another great opportunity to do that sort of thing. But when I was teaching, I was right out of school and didn't have a lot of experience. And, at the end of the day, though, at 3 o'clock, I wanted my kids to walk out of that classroom and walk out of the school like human beings, like not like wild animals. And so they had to be calm, organized before we would even line up. And so I started writing names on the board when I saw kids out of their desks and running around and not sitting quietly. I'd write their names on the board, and they would just look at them and be like, yeah, whatever. And so one day I decided I'm going to write down the names of the kids that are sitting in their desks quietly. And so I put Melissa up there and Tom. And the kids hear the chalk on the chalkboard, and they turn around and see if it's them. But no, it's Melissa. They look at Melissa. She's sitting in her desk. And it kind of caught them off guard. But it was just the idea of I'm catching them being good. I'm acknowledging the ones that are doing good. And then it wasn't long before the rest of them started falling in line, because that's what I was noticing. That's what was getting attention. So positive reinforcement and catching them being good can be a very powerful thing. Okay, the next topic is rules and limit setting. And this is where we'll touch on potty training again, but it's not just applicable to potty training, it's applicable to a lot of different things that we want them to do. To the extent that we can establish routines, we should. Everyone knows how powerful routines are. Teachers, if you're a teacher in a classroom with children, you know how powerful and how necessary routines can be. If you ask a teacher, why do you have all these routines in your classroom? She'll tell you. She'll tell you why. But at home, you can ask the kids, what's the first thing you do when you get into Miss So-and-so's classroom? And they'll tell you what the first thing they do is. Well, what do you do right after that? They'll tell you. And after that, well, if it's Mondays, we do this. If it's Fridays, we do this. Okay. What do you do right before lunch? They can tell you. What do you do right after lunch? They'll tell you. And there's a reason for that. Children, as with the rest of us, need routines. We all have routines that you could say we rely on. We depend on routines. You may say we're creatures of comfort. That's another way of saying it. But we all have routines. And why do we have routines? Because they provide a sense of security. We know what to expect. We know what's coming. Those are all things that we all want and need to have. Same with kids. They do better if they know what's coming, if they know what's expected of them next. So how do we establish routines? The only way to establish routines is to establish routines. There's no shortcut. We just have to decide what our routines are going to be, make up a list for the kids, age appropriate, developmentally appropriate. Here's what you do on school days. This is your routine on school days. And you can, list it for them. Draw pictures. Have them help make these charts. And then they know what to do. Okay, I did this. What comes next? All right, I did my chores. What's next? Something fun, a snack or a game. Okay, I did that. Then what? Nap. Okay. Then what? Lunch. Oh, good. Then what? Maybe another chore. Okay. But then what's after that? Play. Oh, good. Okay. So you mix it up. The routine doesn't have to be drudgery, but it has to include everything. that they need to do. And then when kids get used to that, you'll see how, I think you'll see how more smoothly their day goes, how smoothly your day goes, and how comfortable they get in the routine. Expectations. I think many times we hurt ourselves because we don't make our expectations as clear as we could. Sometimes we leave a little gray area. And if there's gray area or there's loopholes anywhere, our little lawyer, our blossoming lawyers that we're trying to raise will find those loopholes and exploit that gray area. A colleague of mine used to tell the story of when she was little, the boys would be jumping out of the tree, pretending to be G.I. Joes, right? I've got my parachute. I went and got a pillowcase, and it's my parachute, and I'm jumping out of the tree, and I'm the Army guy landing. And Mom came out and said, you need to stop jumping out of that tree. I don't want to be taking anybody to the emergency room today. No more jumping out of the tree. So then she came back out 10 minutes later, and here are the boys jumping off the roof of the garage. And she said, what are you doing? I told you to stop that. They said, you said don't jump out of the tree. We weren't jumping out of the tree. We're jumping off the garage. So, perfect example of what kids will do. So we need to be clear, and we need to try to express our expectations in the positive as often as possible. Tell them what we want them to do. In that example, Mom could have said, feet have to stay on the ground. Feet cannot leave the ground. That eliminates trees, roof of garages, fences, anything else. So we have to be clear. When we say things like, straighten up this room, we know what that means. We know what we mean by that. Is that what they think it means? The same thing? Usually not. So if we just say, clean up this room, and we expect it to look like we think it should look, we're going to be disappointed more often than not. So if our expectations is, pick up everything off the floor and put it where it belongs, that's a different thing. And that's something that they can follow, and there's no gray area. There's no interpretation. I mean, if we leave anything up to interpretation, we're just asking for trouble. We don't want them to be interpreting what they think we meant by these expectations. We want them to know beyond a shadow of a doubt what our expectations are, right? And then finally, rules. If we think why we have rules in society as adults, we have rules for order, for safety, for predictability, for a lot of reasons. Most of our rules are laws in society, right? And there's reasons we have those laws, those rules. And there's reasons we follow those rules. But now if you ask kids about rules, they see rules a little bit differently. They see rules as restrictions or as oppression or punishment. Why do you have all these rules for us? Why do we have to turn off the TV? Why do we have to go to bed at this time? Why can't we go over to so-and-so's house? Why do we have to be home at a certain time? They think we're being repressive and oppressive and being mean to them. But if we think about why we have rules for our children, and when I ask this question, parents will say, oh, we have rules for our children because we want them to be safe. We want them to learn the value of order. We want them to grow up to be productive citizens and happy citizens in society. And I'll say, why do you care if they're safe? Why do you care if they learn order? Why do we care if they grow up to be productive citizens? Why? And they'll say, because we love them. And I'll say, that's exactly right. We have rules for our kids because we love them. They think we have rules because we hate them and we want to be as mean as possible to them. The complete opposite. And so if there's that gap of understanding of an intention, we're going to have a hard time. So to the extent that we can demonstrate and illustrate to our children that our rules are meant for one reason only, and that's because we love them, I think they'll start to look at our rules a little bit differently and maybe have a little bit different appreciation of them. One of the things we like to hand out in our group is a blank piece of paper with a border of hearts, just all different sizes of hearts on the board. And in the middle of that page, families can write their house rules. These are the rules at our house. We listen to each other. We look out for each other. We're kind. We use kind words. We're trying new things. We're patient. You know, these, and it's not don't hit, don't scream, don't do anything. It's what we are going to do that we put on there. Those are our house rules. And parents will tell me that it makes a difference in the way kids look at rules and the way they follow it. All right, let's pause there.
Okay, no questions. Just a little discussion reinforcing that idea that you know, what you focus on, you get more of, and you know, really sort of the beauty of that catching kids doing good things and reinforcing that, and how that really you know, what you're looking for, what you focus on, you get more of. So if we focus more on the positives, that's what we're likely to get more of, right? So some of that discussion going on in the chat.
Yeah, and that's so true, so true. Perhaps the only thing kids love more than stickers is attention.
Right.
And they'll do whatever they need to do to get that attention. If we train them, and if they learn that fighting or being mean to their brother or sister or something like that will get attention, bingo, 100% of the time, that's what they're going to do because it works. But if we train them and teach them that being kind to your little sister or being kind to your big brother or helping around the house, doing something without even being asked, if that's what gets our attention 100% of the time, that's what they're going to do. Right. They'll do whatever works.
And okay. I thought of too, Kevin, and you know, like my own parenting foibles sometimes when you talked about rules and expectations, and you know, if you give a kid a list of 5 things that you want him to do and you come back and 4 of them are done and 1 of them's not, it's so easy to go to the focus of the like, oh my God, I asked you to do this and you didn't do this thing, and not even, you know, praise or affirm or notice more the, you know, the things that they did get done. I mean, and sometimes that's just, you know, our own bad days or whatever, but just thinking about how discouraging that can be for our children, right? When they've done, you know, 80% of what we asked and we focus on the 20% that wasn't done, right?
Right. And there's a way to focus on that 20%, but not at the expense of the 80%. Right. Yeah, very good point. Okay. So now 2 more topics. One is discipline. And I always like to mention the two different definitions of discipline. One is punishment, used as an instrument of chastisement or correction. The other one is an activity, an exercise, or a regimen that develops a skill or training. And that's the one that I like to focus on. The one is kind of a negative attitude. The other is positive. One happens after an adverse event or after a mistake. The other is work done beforehand that ideally will prevent adverse events or mistakes from happening. The definition of a disciple is one who is a pupil or an an adherent of the doctrines of another person, a follower of another person. Whether we like it or not, our children are becoming our disciples. They're learning from us, and they're learning much more by watching us than by listening to our words. I think most would agree with that. So what are our doctrines? Not just our beliefs and our thoughts, but our behaviors and the way we treat other people, including, and maybe especially, our children. How we treat them, how we treat our spouse, how we treat our partner or other adults in our lives, and how we treat them, the children. That's how they learn. That's the kind of disciples they're going to be. Another quick story. I had a mom in a group one time said, you know what, I need more discipline. And I said, well, tell us, what do you mean by that? She said, well, when I go shopping, I have very low discipline. I'll just start buying this and that and the other thing. Next thing you know, I'm over budget and I have a bunch of stuff in my cart that I don't really need or want. And I feel bad. Or dieting. I need discipline with dieting. I need discipline with exercising. I need more discipline. When people say that, does that mean they need somebody to beat them or to browbeat them or to punish them? That's not what they're looking for, I don't think. I asked this mom who talked about shopping. I said, what do you need when you say I need more discipline? She said, I need structure and support. And she talked about that a little bit. She talked about structure, like what kind of structure? Maybe a shopping list. Make a shopping list beforehand and stick to it. Don't deviate. Or maybe allow yourself one deviation off the shopping list, just to have some sort of spontaneity. Or you may see something that you forgot, but just allow yourself one thing that's not on the list. That's structure. And then support. She said her kids support her. She gives them a copy of the list, and they say, Mom, that's not on the list. Okay. So structure and support. When we think of disciplining our kids, how can we provide structure and support? There's lots of ways to do that. When I was in school, the training that we received was called formation. And I think in a lot of ways, formation is also what we can consider raising our children. We're training them. We're forming them into becoming the best version of themselves they can be. And when we think of forming our children, much the same way as a potter forms the clay that he or she is working with, gently molding here, a little pressure here, a little shaping there, little by little, over time. Then they come up with the object that they're trying to create or they're trying to make. And I think we can use that image in raising our kids. How are we forming them? Two effective strategies, and we're not going to have time to go into these into depth, but one is ignoring. And many of you have done this, where a child will fall out on the floor and have a fit on the floor, and we'll just step over them. We'll just walk by and not even acknowledge that that's going on. And there's a reason we do that. We don't want to give it attention. As we just mentioned, things that get attention will probably keep happening. But we can use ignoring. Maybe whining. You've probably ignored whining. Children will try that. They'll whine, beg, please, all this kind of stuff. And we just ignore it, because we want them to learn that it doesn't work. And it's ineffective, and they should stop doing it. So sometimes that can be an effective tool. However, we do want to make sure that we're not ignoring the person. We're ignoring a certain behavior. And usually it's just kind of an attention-seeking mild behavior. Some behaviors you can't ignore. Any behaviors that involve danger or safety or destruction of property or harming another person or severe disrespect, anything that crosses that line, you probably shouldn't ignore. You probably should deal with that. But other things like whining, begging, pouting, things like that, we probably can ignore and not give it attention. The second thing we can use is timeout. And I wish we had more time to talk about timeout because it's such a misunderstood and often misused strategy, but it can be so effective if we use it in a good way. And just to kind of make a long story short, I have a co-worker, a colleague, who used to be a preschool teacher, and she couldn't use timeout in her classroom because of the negative connotations that it's gotten over the years. And parents would say, oh, you're not going to put my child in timeout. You're not going to torture them. And she was thinking, like, torture? What are you talking about? But that's how a lot of people perceive timeout, as torture almost. So she called it something else. And you know what she called it? Me time. She would ask the child if they were just so dysregulated that they were about to hit somebody, or maybe they did hit somebody. And she said, I think you could use some me time. And me time was a beanbag chair or a pillow off to the side, not in a corner or not behind anything, not in a closet, but just a pillow somewhere where they could sit and breathe and relax. And no one would bother them. And people would leave them alone and they could compose themselves. So she had 3 and 4-year-olds knowing when they needed me time. They would come to her in the morning. Miss Kim, I need some me time right off the bat. I need to go straight to me time today. And she would let them go. There it is right there. Come out when you're ready. So she had 3 and 4-year-olds putting themselves in timeout and taking themselves out of timeout, though she called it me time, because they understood it. They understood what it was about. We all need me time. Parents need me time. If tensions are high and kids are dysregulated and we're becoming dysregulated, everybody needs a few minutes of me time. That's another thing that you can practice with your kids. Talk about it. Practice me time. Let them know that when they're in me time, you're not going to bother them. Nobody is going to bother them. They're going to be left alone. So that when you say, you know what, kids, I need 5 minutes of me time, I'm putting myself in me time because I'm getting upset. They'll know, oh, we got to leave mom alone. We got to leave dad alone. He's in me time. That's what you do. You leave people alone. So you got to practice these things. There's one more topic, but I want to pause there to see if there's any questions.
No new questions or comments have come across.
Okay. Uh-oh. I'm not.
You're not advancing?
I'm not advancing. Oh, now I'm advancing.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right.
Okay. So the last thing, natural and logical consequences. And just briefly, sometimes we'll talk about what are the difference between consequences and punishments and how effective are each. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong or one is necessary and one is not. I just like to talk about the differences. Punishments, where do they come from? They come from us. We institute these punishments. We hand them down. We impose them. Kids will answer the door and their friends will say, why can't you come out? Why can't you play? And they'll say, well, because my dad's mad at me. I'm on punishment. Is that really why they can't come out? Because of me, something I did? I'm getting the blame. But it was a decision they made. But they don't always see that if a punishment is imposed by someone else. They don't always see that. Punishments can often be very harsh or vindictive or disrespectful or ineffective. Parents will say, the more I punish them, the worse they get. They can also lead to children becoming more sneaky. You could ask a child, what are 2 ways to avoid being punished? And they might say, well, one is to do the right thing and not disobey. But the other way to avoid punishment is don't get caught. And once they realize that's an option, and once they start thinking of ways, okay, how can I get away with this and not get caught, but still do it? We don't want them spending their time thinking of that. So that's where consequences are a little bit different. They tend to just happen, whether we're involved or not. Consequences happen. Think of the example of you have a warm can of soda and you want to drink it, but you don't want to drink it warm. You want to get it cold, and you want to get it cold fast. You look in the freezer, no ice. Oh, somebody forgot to fill the ice tray. Well, let me just put this can in the freezer. It'll get cold quick. All of us have done this. But what happens if you forget about the can of soda and you return? Oh my gosh, you return to it. You open up the freezer and you see an explosion, or what's left of an explosion, and a big mess. Now, not only do you have no soda to drink, but you have a mess to clean up. Who punished you? Who gave you that punishment? No one. It's just what happens. That's just the consequence. It's just what happens when you put a can of soda in the freezer. So if we think of ways that we can use consequences to teach our children the lessons, they'll learn that if they make a bad decision, it's going to have a consequence whether I get caught or not. Whether someone punishes me or not, it's going to have consequences. Like the example Julie gave earlier of the child coming home from school, maybe got in trouble for something at school, and there's a consequence for that. You know, you don't do this, well then you can't go on the field trip. Or you don't do this, and this is the consequence of that. You know, you lose a privilege or something. And ask the kids how, try to help them see that those consequences can teach the lesson rather than our punishments. Some consequences we can set up and let kids know, if you make this choice and do this, it's going to have a good consequence. If you do this and make this choice, it's going to have a consequence you're not really going to like. Just so you know, the choice is up to you. But your choice is going to decide what the consequence, what the result is going to be. Not me. Your choice. Good consequences need to have, good choices need to have good consequences. We can't overlook that and neglect that. So if they make good choices, there should be good consequences. Just as if they make poor choices, they can have poor consequences. And one example that I'll wrap this section up with is lying. We can punish kids for lying. There's no end to the kinds of punishments we can put children on for lying. But what is the real consequence of lying? If you lie to someone, especially someone close to you, and they find out about it, don't they look at you a little differently than they'd had before? And if any of us has ever lied to someone and gotten caught, we know what that looks like. And it's not a good look. It's not a look we want to have from someone that we love. So when we know and we see that someone is looking at us a little bit differently than they used to look at us, that's a consequence. And that can teach a strong lesson. This is a quote that I've always liked. My father didn't tell me how to live. He lived, and he let me watch him do it. That was by C.B. Kelland. And I think it illustrates that children learn more by watching us than by listening to us. So if we just try to model the behavior we want to see in our children, we'll be doing a great service to them and ourselves. And then finally, I just want to remind everyone, I tell parents this all the time. I've been so lucky to meet so many parents who care so much about their kids. And they participate in a group like this because they want to be the best they can be for one reason, for their kids. It's humbling to me, and it's also inspiring to me. But I always tell them, you're probably doing a better job than you give yourself credit for. You know, give yourself a pat on the back. Look at all the good things you're doing and try to do those more often. Secondly, be what you want your children to be. Show them what respect is. Show them what listening is. Show them what sharing is. Show them what following instructions. Show them what being obedient is. Show them. And they'll learn a lot quicker, and the lessons will stick a lot longer. And then finally, we're in this together, especially during these times. People are struggling maybe in ways that they never even imagined. I mean, parenting is a challenge to begin with, but in times like this, it can be even more of a challenge. So we are in this together. Mr. Rogers used to say, when there's trouble, look for the helpers. So if you're struggling or when you're struggling, look for helpers. They're around. And look for helpers. We all need help. You know, we all need somebody to lean on, as Bill Withers said.
Okay, Kevin, I have two quick things. I'm sorry. One person asked if you could show the quote again, if you mind flipping back a couple slides so that people can see that quote again. And one other thought that I don't know if people have any thoughts of their own about this, or if you just have anything to say, is that sometimes it can be hard to know when maybe language abilities haven't developed, and when to attend to whining, and when it's reinforcing whining. You know, it's like helping kids find the words, I think, is, you know, versus when it truly is more whining for whining, and, you know, how to judge when to ignore it and when to sort of help with that skill building piece.
Right. That's an excellent question. Right. Excellent question. And I think more often than not, as parents, we start to learn our children's expressions and what they mean and when they use them. Many parents will, you know, you'll be visiting a family and the child will start carrying on about something and babbling, and you'll be like, I have no idea what he's saying to me. And mom will say, oh, well, he's saying this. You know, you kind of start to understand your own children. But in either case, whether it's they're having a struggle to express themselves, or they're using whining as kind of a tool to get what they want or get attention, either way, I think we can avoid giving it a lot of attention and just coach them and encourage them to express themselves in a different way. Maybe it's by using their hands, maybe some kind of primitive sort of sign language that you invent. You don't have to learn sign language. You can invent your own sign language and have the kids use that and try to use that to express themselves. Because if a child is trying to express themselves and they can't get people to understand them, they're going to get frustrated. And when they get frustrated, they're going to act in ways probably that we don't want them to act. But if you can help them focus on ways to express themselves that are appropriate and effective, and not even talk about whining, not say, well, stop that whining, I hate it, stop it. Just kind of let that go and focus on what they can do to express themselves. I don't know if that helps or not, but it's just one idea that popped into my head. But just focusing on what they can do and not so much on the negative behavior or what they can't do.
Yeah. No, that was really good. Thank you, Kevin, for going back and for replying to that thought. Anything else that you want to say before you wrap up?
No, I'm finished. I think I've taken all my time. I want to thank everybody for your attention. I hope it was helpful. My email address is on there if you have any other questions, or if there's anything else that I can do to be helpful, please feel free to let me know.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was really great information, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I want to also let you guys know that if you would like to suggest an idea for future training, or if you would like one of our organization's subject matter experts to lead a discussion for an organization, group, or business that you are connected to, please let us know, and we will try to work that out with you. And also to let you know that as a follow-up to this presentation, we will be sending out a brief survey. Please help us out by filling that out and giving us feedback on how this worked for you. And also that you will be getting a PDF version of Kevin's PowerPoint. And as a thanks for participating, 10 participants in today's webinar will be receiving an Amazon gift card as a token of our appreciation for you spending your morning with us. And I want to thank again St. Louis ReCAST for their support and all of you guys for joining us today. Thank you.